Hello, and welcome to another episode of the DemiTastes Whiskey Podcast. Today, we are doing a stream for Veterans Day, where we actually have a member of the Whiskey Lodge who is himself a veteran, David, or SailorGraf, or BulletMagnet, is joining us today, depending on where you find him. Uh, so, totally forgot like the first half of the intro. Welcome to the DemiTaste Podcast, where we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. And we usually talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations that we have. So today we'd like to have a conversation about veteran-owned whiskey and spirits brands. And we would also like to learn a little bit about SailorGraf's experience in the Navy, if I'm not mistaken. First of all, I'm joined as usual, or actually for the first time in a while, by my co-host, Duckphil Platypus, and of course, our guest, David. David, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm David on the Whiskey Lodge and the Discords. I'm BulletMagnet 187. And then most other places, I'm SailorGraf. So, like, you see me talking crap in the on the Twitch stream, I'll be the sailor.
All right. I have prepared most of a cocktail prep in advance. And what I'm using here is the first featured brand of today, not ads or anything like that. This is the smoked cocktail kit, which comes in a lovely box. I've actually bought this as a gift for a couple of people already. This comes with 5 different flavors of smoking chips that end up looking like this. All right, let's get that right side up. So this one is the smoked coffee flavor, which is one of my favorites. And you're not going to be able to see this at all, but they are really tiny grains of wood chips in there. It also comes with, at least the kit that I ordered, is this like sort of upgraded, like brushed gunmetal sort of torch. And I'm going to make sure that I don't melt any of my equipment here and make sure that I point that well away. So you put the chips in the sort of receptacle up here at the top. It's got a nice screen on there to keep the ash from falling down. And you basically just shoot the fire at the cup of chips, and then this smoke sort of drips down into the cocktail. I think I've shown this on stream before, but I'm going to give it a try anyway today.
Ooh, fire.
And I don't know if you can see that smoke sort of falling down inside the glass there.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty cool thing to do for a presentation. I actually just did that as a thing for a guest that we have over at the house. And it makes this nice, lovely layer of smoke on the glass. I didn't have any citrus to do a garnish with today, but I recommend doing an orange peel in there and having it upside down so the white part is facing up, because that absorbs the smoke really nicely and it stays with the drink. The actual cocktail spec that I've done here is, I talked a while ago about, I have this whiskey barrel aged maple syrup bottle that I emptied out, and then I refilled about a third of the way up with Canadian whiskey to just sort of pre-infuse a maple old fashioned. So that's the base of the cocktail, and I also put Angostura and Aztec chocolate bitters in there, and those pair really nicely with the smoke.
Yeah, I need to figure out more uses for the Aztec chocolate bitters.
I kind of just try it with a lot of different stuff. Depends on sort of what I'm in the mood for, I guess. And I guess how the spirits speak to us. You get an intuition for these things at some point, I guess. We could get into that at some point, but not today. Bill, what are you drinking today?
Oh, I just poured myself a little bit of Falls Church bourbon whiskey. This was the 2022 Virginia Whiskey Tournament champion. It is owned by a Air Force veteran and his son, Michael and Lorenzo. They're really cool people. I got to tour their facility, which I was really excited about. And they make a pretty darn good bourbon.
Do they make other products as well?
They also make some flavored vodkas and I don't think it's available anymore, but they had a like hot pepper infused whiskey that was very good. Very different, but very good.
Nice. And by the way, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make a joke, right? When you say, do they have any other products, meaning American single malt?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
that's always what I'm asking about.
They do not make any American single malt. I got to try, and I believe it is at this point public knowledge that they were experimenting with it because it was not. I was not asked to keep it under wraps, and they shared it with people at an event. A whiskey from Spelt, and that was really good. And I've been looking for it. I'm probably gonna have to go visit them to get some.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by that, right? Move away from the main 4 grains and bring in amaranth or something crazy.
Yeah, actually, one of the ones I specifically looked at was this a veteran-owned brand was the Dry Fly, because they have this cool straight triticale whiskey which tastes like, it's been a while since I've had it, but I remember it being quite on the sweet side in a surprising way. I want to say Skittles may have come up as a descriptor, but it's honestly been a year or more since the last time I tasted this, so I don't exactly recall. But as far as I can tell, they're not veteran-owned. But yeah, going outside of those main 4 grains is definitely an interesting topic of conversation at the moment. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the stream on effectively very last minute notice. We canceled yesterday and decided to move the stream to today and do a Veterans Day stream instead. But we did basically no announcement of that fact. So everyone who's here live, very much appreciated. Thanks for joining.
It's good to see you, Genji.
David, what are you having?
Ooh, I have yet to pour anything. I will grab my Highland Park. I'm a fanboy of Highland Park, so this is the cask strength release number 1. And I'm almost out of it, and I'm sad that I'm almost out of it.
Do you still have the Wings of the Eagle sample?
I do.
We could pour a little bit of that together later.
Okay, I'd have to go in the other room.
Oh, okay, then maybe not.
No,
but I could join you in solidarity for some Highland Park later.
I can always go off camera for 30 seconds to snag that.
Well, all right. Having introduced, yeah, that's not coming through. Oh, if you turn that around right in front of you, I think it'll come through.
Right in front of me. Yeah, no, it's almost empty.
Yeah.
So it's Highland Park cask strength release number 1.
And that's using the Viking Honor branding? Did
Yes.
they not do a cask strength before that? Interesting.
No, not that I'm aware of.
It's at least batch 1 of the Viking Honor cask strength.
Yes, and they're on release. They've done 3. I don't know if 4 is out yet.
Well, all right. I don't know if either of you wants to pull up a list of other brands that we've had that we sort of looked up and figured out, because we could probably just do a few call outs. I think we've pretty much covered what we have. Oh, not entirely. But we'll get to that later. As we found out earlier that there is a veteran connection with Catoctin Creek. And yes. Phil and I both have a sample, or Phil has plenty of bottles and I have a sample of Catoctin Creek. So we can get into that later. But for now, David, feel free to take the floor and talk about whatever tickles your fancy for Veterans Day.
The floor is all mine. Okay, so Veterans Day. I guess I'll start by talking a little bit about myself and my experience, right? So SailorGraf, I was a sailor in the United States Navy about 5 years. We don't have what are called MOS, right? So military occupational specialty. Most other branches have some kind of, number, letter, code, and that says what job you did. Navy wants to be a little bit different, so we had what was called a rate, and that's what our job was. Mine was a PS, personnel specialist. So I did my admin stuff and payroll adjacent things. So I'm kind of did HR type functions and payroll and travel claims and that type of stuff. So I was very much an admin type guy. The first 2 years I spent up on the West Coast at the submarine base that's there, Bangor Sub Base, which is just north of Bremerton, Washington. So I spent some time up there, and then I went down to San Diego, California, and spent 2 years there on board the USS Boxer. It's one of the ships that was involved in the Captain Phillips rescue. I was not on it. That was the deployment before mine, and I got to hear all the cool stories. And I'm like, cool, I wonder what awesome stuff we're going to do on deployment. And we did donuts in the Gulf of Aden. Super exciting. I did not get a little stir crazy like most people on lockdown during COVID.
That's a nice benefit, actually. I assume that wasn't sarcastic, because that could have easily been sarcastic.
It's just a little bit of sarcasm. It's
Well,
very
I was going to say, it sounds like a good benefit of being in the Navy and stationed aboard a U.S. naval vessel is that it prepares you because you're already stir crazy. So lockdown doesn't add to it.
No, not particularly. And that is really a good kind of allegory for Navy deployment, right? You work, you eat, you sleep, you do whatever recreational activity you do, all in the same area, right? You're on the ship. So it's very similar to lockdown, only instead of being in lockdown with your pets and your loved ones, you are there with your coworkers. So
Yeah, I would bet that wears on you after a while.
oh, it sure does. Sure does. But it's part of the job. It does get tiring, but there are some small breaks in there. We try to hit port every so many days so the crew doesn't get too crazy. There was a stretch for a while where we did have some prisoners on board that were being interrogated by NCIS. And when you're in that type of scenario, you can't go to port because there's this potential risk of someone trying to free that person that you have on board and in the prison, right? So we did donuts in the Gulf of Aden. We had a latitude and a longitude on a map that was called the operating box, and we traced that line, those latitudes and longitudes, and every now and then you could feel it. They timed it out pretty nicely to where it was nighttime when they made that hard right or left turn, whatever it was. And so most people were asleep when we just kind of shifted real big.
So they made sure that everybody was woken up by the extreme turning.
No, surprisingly, right? So when you're on the ship, if you're an enlisted person, you have a rack, right? It's a bunk bed. They call it a coffin rack because it opens up, so you have like a little cot, and then it opens up, and it's the top of your storage space. All your personal belongings, whatever you want and have and need, are in that. And so that's where your uniforms go. You've got, a couple changes of clothes for when you go out to port. Good toilet paper, so you don't have to use the stuff the ship is supplying. Candy, whatever else you need kind of fits in there. And these are stacked 3 high. And so you either get a bottom bunk where you smell everybody's feet, a middle rack where, you're okay, or the top rack where you kind of have to you have to climb up and risk falling out in the middle of the night.
Which level did you end up in?
All of them. We kind of moved around.
Okay.
So it was my favorite was the middle, of course, because everything's at that nice level. Yeah, and these are like tiny cots. We're not talking twin bed stacked up. It's small. And then if you're an officer, you get stacked too high, but you have kind of your own what they call a ward room, right? So it's a kind of like a dorm where you get to share with one other person.
When I was in the Boy
the
Scouts,
boat. last thing is that the boat kind of rocks, and so even though you're kind of like staring at the underside of your friend's locker, you kind of get rocked to sleep with the boat, and so you're kind of like bundled up, and you're like, okay, this is kind of nice. So the ship turning in the middle of the night was not noticeable unless you're awake.
So when I was in Boy Scouts, we spent a night on the Torsk in Baltimore, which is I believe, early post World War II submarine. And the racks on the Torsk were about 20 inches wide. And I stayed for a night on the USS Barry, which is or was at the it was at the Navy Yard in DC. And the racks on those were about 25, 30 inches, somewhere in there. And I'm sure it's never happened to you, but I rolled out of my rack on the Torsk and fell because I was all the way in the top rack. Fell like, I want to say, about 5.5, 6 feet to the steel plates. And I tried to do the same thing on the Barry and ended up wedged between the bulkhead and the edge of my rack.
Oh wow.
So, I empathize with the cramped living quarters.
Yes.
I figured you would enjoy or find amusing the story of me getting wedged between a bulkhead and a rack.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there are some of the ways where the racks are configured, and this is true for like any type of space on board a ship, right? You're like, why is this here? Who put this thing in this corner when there's like nowhere to get to it or like maintain whatever the thing is. Side note, they do make safety straps for racks, and they must not have had any for the kids on the field trip.
No, definitely not.
Yes,
I
they're
think it was
basically just like a
asked
big,
if anybody.
yeah.
Did you say
Yes,
20
but
inches wide? I'm trying to imagine that now. I don't think I couldn't lay flat on 20 inches. I'd have to be on my side for sure.
so the thing to remember about the Torsk is it is a diesel submarine. The entire width of the enlisted sailors' quarters, where the racks were, where we were sleeping, was about 12 feet. And it had 4-foot aisles because you had to be able to get a torpedo down the length of that room. And it had two 4-foot wide aisles on either side of a central pair of racks that were 4 high and then 4 high against the outer walls. And the top rack was actually slightly narrower than the ones below because of the curvature of the hull.
Yeah, submarines are when we talk about space optimization, right? They do the maximum they can. Some submarines do a practice called hot racking, and it sounds exactly as gross as you think it is. Basically, they assign 2 people to a single bed. One is day shift and one is night shift. So your bed is nice and warm as you take all of your sheets off and stuff them into your locker while you go to whichever shift you have. And then shortly thereafter, your bunkmate comes and sleeps in the bed that you were just sleeping in.
Well, at least you're changing the sheets.
I would hope so, but knowing some sub people, right? I was on the sub base for 2 years. Knowing some of them, I'm sure they just said, "Yeah." So, I
You
like
think
to
in
think they
the
changed.
you think in the armed forces that people would have more discipline than that, but there's always laziness and exhaustion.
Absolutely. Yeah, and things get a little different, right? When you're isolated or particularly on submarines where you don't see the light of day for 2, 3, 4, however many months, they're in uninterrupted operations. Fun story. Vitamin D helps wounds heal. Like if you scrape your knuckle, it's just gonna not heal. So without the sunlight and
Oh,
more fresh air, you just have an open wound on your hand for until you go out in the sun again plus 2 weeks.
wow, that's really good to know. And also, I
Mhm.
imagine that you were making liberal use of vitamin D supplements on the sub then.
I was never on a submarine. I was stationed on the base, so my role was to do like admin type stuff. So each sub has one single admin person, and I was their point of contact. So they would send all the requests out to me, and they'd be like, "Hey, Joe is nearing his order end date. He wants to, get new orders to go to a different submarine or wherever else he needed to go." And Ben is his contract is ending, right? So we either need to reenlist him or we need to send him home. And so we kind of work with the one admin on the submarine and figure out, okay, this guy needs to get sent home. This guy needs to go to Groton, Connecticut to go on a sub base out there and do their thing. And this other person, all right, they're going to reenlist. We got their paperwork. They're going to strategically wait until they're a certain latitude and longitude where it's tax-free dollars so that they don't have to share the reenlistment bonus with Uncle Sam.
Aha. Very clever.
Mm-hmm. And these are not insignificant reenlistment bonuses, right? So again, right? If you have to hot rack with somebody, you get some extra pay there. But it does take an extra set of expertise to work on a submarine. Again, right? You're in tight, cramped spaces. Everything kind of fits together perfectly, like a Volkswagen engine. Only it's much larger and deadlier underneath the water.
And smellier.
So smelly.
I imagine a sub gets pretty ripe. I'm guessing that the ship you were aboard probably had more airflow.
Quite a bit more airflow, yes. So I was on the LHD-4 Boxer, so it's a LHD, right, landing craft something, because it's been a while since I've been on it. Basically, it's the same type of boats that you see in all the D-Day movies where they kind of back up onto the shore and then the gate comes out and they drive some tanks off of it. So I was on one of those. It's a mini aircraft carrier, basically, and we launched aircrafts and the admin office was underneath the flight deck, so when the Harrier jets were coming back and doing vertical landings, you could hear the wheels bounce off the roof as I'm going, "And what's wrong with your pay?"
So your service was relatively uneventful. But what do
Relatively.
you imagine might have been a typical eventful type of thing that could have happened for you, like combat scenario or anything like that?
So when I was enlisted, it was from about partway through 2008 to 2012, 13, kind of because it was 5-ish years. And so not a whole lot crazy happened for the Navy particularly. We did anti-piracy. And so part of our deployment was to relieve some other ship that was in that area. If anybody's got good geopolitical memory, so 2010, 2011, that's when things started popping off in Libya. So we replaced another ship that was out in that region, and they went into the Mediterranean to maybe do some anti-missile defense type stuff. So that is potentially an eventful deployment that the other ship had. And for us, there wasn't a whole lot going on. The prisoner that we had on board worked for Al Qaeda. And so they were buying guns from Al-Qaeda and selling them to Somali pirates. And the fascinating thing about this prisoner, right? They were very, very well spoken. I had some friends who were guards on the ship, which is not. It's like the other duties as assigned on your like job application. They just happen to be like, yeah, sure, I'll be a prison guard. Like, so one of the guys was a photographer. And his other duties as assigned was like, all right, so I'm just going to take a shift watching this prisoner. And so this Somali pirate gun runner had advanced degrees, spoke multiple languages, and he was just pretty chill apparently. And he's like, yeah, I make a ton of money selling guns, and now like my kids don't have to live in poverty. And it was like, okay, well that's interesting. Well, have fun in federal prison.
Was he fairly open during interrogations, or was he unwilling to speak? Or
I don't know. NCIS was on board, and those were not open door interrogations. So all of the interactions that I had heard of was outside of the interrogations, while he was just kind of in the cell doing his thing. But yeah, it was a fascinating like thing to be like adjacent to. People are mostly just going about their days, and then every now and then you hear over an intercom in the hangar. So we, like I said, we had an aircraft deck where we launched jets from and helicopters, and then underneath that was the hangar bay, and so that's where we stored most of these aircrafts. And there's giant elevators that take all the aircrafts from the hangar bay up to the flight deck. And so it's kind of open air like that, and you could hear over an intercom, hey, everybody face outboard, right? Look to the ocean or get inside. The prisoner's coming up, and they don't want him to see your face.
Ah.
So, and I guess Geneva Conventions and all that, they needed to see fresh air and, have outside time as best as possible when you're on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Or a ship, I should say, if we're going to be all above board military wise. Boats are not big vessels.
So my grandfather both of my grandfathers were in the Navy. One of them was gunner's mate on the escort destroyer Kephart, DE 207 APD 61 after conversion. And he used to get so mad when people referred to ships as boats because, and I quote, boats leave the water, ships don't. Which, strictly speaking, ships do leave water. Dry dock is a thing. But,
yeah.
So I actually just finished my Washington State boater card course. So I got to learn all kinds of things about boats of various kinds. And one of the fun things was that for Navy vessels, there's an exclusion zone of like you shouldn't go above a certain speed within 300 yards or I believe. And you need to be completely unpowered during within 100 yards of a Navy vessel. I guess a fun question just apropos of I just finished that course. Did you ever have an experience where a civilian vessel approached too close to your vessel?
Too close? No. Questionably close? Absolutely. One of the ports that we stayed in amongst, so it was about an 8-month deployment, give or take, rounding up, right? So we went to Salalah, Oman twice. It's I don't know if folks are familiar with where Oman is, right? So if you look at a map and you see the Arabian Peninsula, just kind of that point at the end of the Arabian Peninsula, that is Oman. And Salalah is a place in Oman. Did not know the country or the city existed until I went there. And so we were there. I honestly don't remember if it was the first or the second time. But I was actually on top of the ship doing a watch, right? So I was being a security guard. And I had this big speaker device. We called it the LRAD, the long range acoustic device. Giant speaker, you flip it on, it sends a message in whatever language locals could be, or you could use the walkie talkie and you can be like, hey, go away. So I'm up there and other folks are around the ship standing watch, and we see a little speedboat coming by, and we're like, oh no, they're getting close. All right, so I'm aiming the little speaker saying, hey, this is a United States vessel, don't get close to us, in Arabic, because that's the spoken language in that region. And they just kind of kept coming for a little bit, and then they turned eventually. So I'm like, okay, good, I did not have to do anything else. And there are other folks who were aiming weaponry at this little speedboat. So I'm not really sure what they were doing or what they thought they were doing, but they had plenty of opportunity to be like, hey, you're getting too close, don't try your luck.
Yeah, the disclaimer that I got during the course was if you do get too close to a Navy vessel, they will shoot you down, and that's your problem, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah, because we did a training about this, and of course, the details kind of washed out of my head now. I want to say it was 94. There was a humanitarian vessel that ended up with a big old hole in the side because tiny little speedboat, one man came up and just kind of blew a hole inside the ship. Cole, yep. So we don't let vessels get close to Navy ships anymore, unless it's all above board and clearance and all that has happened. It's kind of fun segue into how we kind of got supplies on the ship while we're out and about. So anytime there's a resupply ship, we kind of race side by side, and we don't actually like touch or dock or anything, because that would be very bad if you had this big old ship hitting another ship in the middle of the water.
All of that mass and momentum.
Yeah.
Yes. So we find a resupply ship, or the merchant marines have a big network, and so we say, hey, we're going to be here in this area is what we need, and they'll come help us out. And so there's a number of different things that like can and do happen. Sometimes a helicopter is just kind of leapfrogging back and forth, and so you're unpacking pallets off of a helicopter and going back and forth. My favorite is the refueling. They have basically a musket that shoots a foam dart, and they load that and they shoot the foam brick at you, and you have to find it, catch it. There's a string attached, and now you've got a string that leads to the refuel line, and you can pull the string across the like you would think we would have a much more technological solution to that problem, but no. So you're just pulling it over and hooking it up, and then you've got your gas line hooked up for jet fuel, diesel, whatever you need. And then occasionally we'll have other wires, and then we have like just a pulley system that moves crates on a wire across the sea as the big ships are trying to like talk to each other. We're heading 117, 40 knots or whatever the speed is, right? I'm just pulling something out of my butt.
I think an obvious question for drinking enthusiasts would be to ask you about Navy strength gin and the like. Is that still a thing on Navy vessels?
Not particularly. We generally don't keep alcohol on the ship per se. I say generally, there is storage, right? So it's a working vessel. So alcohol is generally frowned upon, but like you can bring it on board. You usually just have to have it locked up in the supply chest. Every now and then, if you go 45 days without hitting a port, they tend to throw you what they call a Steel Beach picnic, right? Hey, good job not touching dry land for a month and a half. Here's 2 beers. Good luck. And so we did have some fun with that. You get a barbecue. There's just random like Weber grills, right, just on the ship somewhere, and they'll bust out the Weber grill and put it up on the flight deck, and you can have burgers and hot dogs and things that are grilled by whoever wants to man that grill station, and then everybody gets two beers if you're of age.
Yeah,
and we're talking like
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I know that in the Royal Navy, they stopped the tot in 1970. And there is was a pretty strong prohibition of alcoholic beverages on Royal Navy vessels in the succeeding years. And that was cause for some controversy at the time. I don't know anything about the U.S. Navy in that regard.
Yeah, it's a very professional organization now. So drinking is generally like you do that on your free time. Don't let it impair workability. Right, the mission comes first.
Do we want to talk about some veteran-owned brands, or like, uh, distilleries
Yeah,
owned
yeah.
or
Let's
operated by
let's take a
veterans?
little break to talk a little bit about whiskey
Yeah.
because we are a whiskey podcast after all, and I have
Yeah.
some more questions that we can get into later.
So I just poured myself some Brady's Accomplice, which is uh, uh, sourced bourbon. They are distilling their own. They sell a white dog that is their own distillate, but they are waiting for their house distilled stock to reach a point where they feel comfortable bottling it and selling it, which is an option that I think catches a lot of flack from some people, but I think it's a viable and responsible way to source and to essentially have a product on the market, build brand recognition, and survive those very turbulent first few years of operation as a distillery. And two of the three founding people for Brady's are Air Force veterans. One in heavy lift logistics, and one was oh shoot, no, I'm going to forget. Of course, I'm going to forget. And one was, oh, it doesn't say, just Air Force.
All right, and remind me. Earlier, you were drinking Falls Church, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Michael, their head distiller, is and founder was Air Force. I have a lot of options for veteran-owned distilleries in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Some that I don't have are Highlands Distillery. They make Warhorn and Cavu, which is a acronym that relates to something Air Force related. There is Ironclad, which is run by Navy guys or former Navy guys. Um, Three Crosses, which is veteran owned, and there are legitimately a lot of distilleries in the Commonwealth of Virginia that are veteran owned because there is a really high percentage of the population here who are veterans, and a lot of the brands don't even mention it prominently on their website.
By the way, we did do a series of videos about the distilleries, the craft distilleries in particular in Virginia. And where relevant, I believe we did mention which ones were veteran owned
Yes.
in at least some cases. So any of those distilleries that Phil just mentioned, you can go learn more about by checking out those videos in our YouTube history, I guess.
Yeah.
You could also go to it just so happens that asmwbook.com is a landing page which happens to have links to those videos as well. That's the website that I'll eventually be repurposing for the book. So that's another place that you could find an easy access to those videos. Now, as for myself, I just poured myself a little bit of the Catoctin Creek Rabble Rouser. So now I have to do the thing where I actually go look at my research. So the interesting thing about Catoctin Creek, it wasn't immediately obvious to us that it was veteran owned, but Scott Harris, if I'm not mistaken, is the husband of Becky Harris,
Yes.
was a computer engineer for the U.S. Navy. So there again, we have a former Navy owned or operated distillery. Is that the rabble rouser specifically there?
No, this is the cask proof because I couldn't remember what you had, and I was thinking about grabbing the rabble rouser, but I couldn't remember if I had sent you or if you had a sample of that or a bottle of it. But I remembered you saying that you had the cask strength, so that's what I grabbed.
Yes. So what I have here is the rabble rouser bonded rye. I did have a taste of the cask strength rye at a Whiskeys of the World event in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And even though at the time, Scotch and to some extent bourbon and American single malt were my favorite categories, one of the most prominent experiences of that night was me tasting the Catoctin Creek for the first time. And at the time, I had not met a rye that I particularly liked, and so it was particularly interesting to me that one of my favorite pours of the night was Catoctin Creek, and not just one but two of the expressions that they had that evening. So I think it's safe to say that I've been a fan of Catoctin Creek ever since, and yet somehow I don't own a whole bottle of it. Still, it's one of those things that went on the shopping list and ended up below the fold for long enough that I kind of forgot to buy anything ever.
Yeah.
Well, that to
It
buy
is safe
list
to
gets
say that I
really
have.
big.
Oh yeah. My problem is so I have some favorite distilleries. Catoctin Creek is one of them. So I have a tendency to go, oh hey, this distillery that I really like has released a new product, and things from new distilleries, sort of, or places I haven't tried something from, get kind of bumped down the list. Um, which is how I've spent the last 3 or 4 years working on getting a bottle of whiskey from every Virginia distillery, and somehow ended up with 14 bottles from Catoctin Creek.
You know, and I have some surprises in my collection too. I own a dozen different expressions of Woodinville whiskey, um, 10 or so Balcones, about the same number of Westward whiskey. And what's funny about these is um, that I wouldn't say that I had necessarily intended to own as many as possible of those whiskeys. It just kind of happened, right? They're that good and they keep doing interesting things. And you're like, ooh, I want that. I want that. I want that. And they're certainly good enough that while I may not say any of those are particularly my favorite distillery, I'm more than happy to support what they're doing.
Oh yeah. Um, Before I forget, I am going to be going and visiting Catoctin Creek tomorrow.
Ooh, excellent.
I'm going to
Take
go buy a
notes.
barrel from them
Ooh,
and say hi.
an
Of
empty
course.
barrel, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't afford a full barrel. I wish I could.
I was like, I feel like I would have heard about it if you were doing a cask pick.
Yeah, no, I wish I could. I really wish I could. But yeah, there are a lot of veteran-owned distilleries all over the United States. Veterans tend to have exited the armed forces with additional skills that are particularly helpful for being moderately successful in business. I say moderately because business is fickle, the world is fickle. Sometimes you can have a lot of skills and all the right components and it still doesn't work out. But veterans have, uh, by virtue of their experience in the forces, tend to have a lot of skills that civilians don't have, and sort of a mindset for understanding and operating within the strict boundaries of bureaucratic red tape while finding new and creative ways to do what they want to do within those boundaries.
I think that's very well said.
Absolutely. Hard to add on to that. So I wanted to ask you, David, just to totally pivot away from that because it was so well said. Based on your time, David, in the armed forces, would you recommend it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it depends on the person. I think it was one of the best things that I could have done for myself. I really love, you know, my experience. it was like a roller coaster, right? There's some really high highs, like zip lining through the forests of Thailand. Like that is a memory I will share, or I will have forever, and I will share it with my friend who went with me. And so those were awesome, but the lows were also really, really low, right? When we talked earlier about getting prepared for lockdown, so there are some times where you just want to strangle the people that you work with, and you're pissed off because you worked 12 on, 12 off for a week, and then now you have to be awake for another 12-hour shift, but then also another 4 hours from midnight to 4 because you need to stand at the gate with a gun to make sure nobody gets on the boat or the ship who shouldn't. So yeah, it's an experience. You do learn a lot of skills. Um, I now work. I still work for government, right? So I moved from military to state government, and so I think that the segue there was very natural for me, especially being kind of an admin type person and doing administrative work. So I now do like state finance. Um, but outside of like the normal job role things, right? They have you exercise so you maintain physical health. There are way more additional duties as assigned that you need to do, especially on board a ship where, okay, there are firefighters on board the ship, but if stuff hits the fan, you are now a firefighter and you need to protect the ship from, sinking. And so I got to learn how to firefight. I learned basic plumbing and welding, right, to patch holes in the ship just in case it's needed. I learned advanced first aid. So I mentioned that the photographer, one of their duties was to be the prison guard, and so when we go into what's called battle stations, right? So if we're in an actual fight with another ship, we go to battle stations. Doesn't matter what your pay is right now. We need to make sure that we don't die. And that we're taking care of our physical health. And so what I would do is I would go out into another area of the ship, and I would be basically like first responder on board the ship and make sure people are patched up and get them to medical. And then general maintenance and stuff, right? Like I worked on greasing ball bearings and making sure that AC units were working properly and proper maintenance was done. So there's a wide range of things that you learn, and they're not related to what your chosen job for the military is. And so I think that is very well preparing you for different aspects of life, right? Like home ownership or just like car maintenance. Hey, here's the schedule. This is when you're supposed to go do these things. Do those in addition to your job, right? This thing's broken. You need to go fix it now. It doesn't matter what your boss needs, a TPF report or whatever. Your house is flooding, fix it. And then you have the know-how to kind of do that. And then wrapped in all of that is kind of the discipline aspect of it, right? There isn't this like, I'll just do it tomorrow. It's like, no, you should do it today. Make sure you get it done. And then
Yep,
there's leadership.
nice discipline that helps you run the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And then like as you start to gain some ranks, right, then you get leadership, right? So at the age of 22, I rebuilt an admin office. The one ship didn't have folks, and they're like, hey, we need to borrow one of your guys, and they're like, right, get out of here, David, you suck. It's not really how it happened, but fun way to tell it. And so I rebuilt another ship's admin office because I had the skills and because, I was of a certain rank, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to do this test. We got 3 new guys. The guy that was above me was staying around. And so I trained up these 3 new guys, and we built a whole new admin office for them. So, I mean, there's, again, this is all outside of the regular customer service, how can I help you with your pay job that I had. So you learn so many things, and I think that kind of speaks to Phil's point, right? You learn how to operate with a lot of competing demands, a lot of things that aren't your job, but that still need to get done. So I think it's a great experience for most people. And then, of course, getting college paid for out of it, having a 0% down home loan. There are other perks once you're out.
So, on a topic related to the Whiskey Lodge, because this is the Whiskey Lodge cast that we're doing here
Absolutely.
today, how did you find yourself into being a whiskey enthusiast and, moreover, a moderator of a fairly large Discord whiskey community, not to mention part of my backend for the podcast?
Yes. Good question. So getting into whiskey, I grew up in New York, and so I saw kind of those Wall Street type bros, and think like the Mad Men persona type thing, fancy suits, offices, whiskey is a part of that idea. And so that was my original like, if I want to be in that world, whiskey is something that I should try. And so I tried a couple things here and there. Didn't really care for it in my younger years. And then I had Highland Park, fancy enough, and I'm like, oh, this is what a good whiskey is. And so since then, I've been like, I like this thing. Malt is great, right? Meh. Sorry, Phil. But malt is there's so much that can come of it, and you could do with it. And so I think I don't know. I like it a lot. When we talk about the 4 common grains and how you can have a similar mash bill, but because you distilled it at a different temperature, or you did 3 distillations instead of 2, or whatever the secret formula for a given whiskey is, you can have varying results that kind of fit a general profile, but the specifics of it are so different from common sources. And so that just fascinates me, and I'm like, oh, this is cool, this is nice, I like this general profile. Give me a Highland Park, I'll probably like it. Give me a malt, I'll probably like it. Give me a rye, and I'll give it to Phil.
I won't say no.
Has that ever
I
happened?
really like rye whiskey. I have only turned down a glass of whiskey once, and it was because I had already had enough.
That is a good point in which to turn down whiskey.
It's a very responsible statement.
Yes.
So on your prompting, or somewhat unprompted, I decided to pull out my own Highland Park 16 Wings of the Eagle, which clearly I'm enjoying because I don't usually go through things this fast. I've only had it for 6 months or something.
I see that box over there. I see it, Phil.
Yeah, I was looking for the full volume.
That's the one I want to get my hands on.
Which one is that?
Valfather.
I was looking for full volume, but I do have the Valfather. Which
I have full volume. That was my first Highland Park, and that is fantastic whiskey.
It is a good one.
It is.
Yeah.
17 years old, but they didn't make a big deal about it on the label, so it kind of sat on shelves to my benefit.
Yes. Yep. The way that Highland Park is doing their releases, there's a lot of stuff out there, but a lot of them, like full volume, they're not making anymore. I'm trying to think of there's so many with things where they're like, oh yeah, we did this run, it was a limited release, but they made like a ton of it, so it's still findable, but like they're not making it anymore.
Oh yeah.
So I think I found Highland Park actually because of you, David.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. This was probably one of the more controversial pairs of reviews I ever posted. I had gone with our friend Nick. I had gone to a whiskey bar, and we saw that they had Stag Junior behind the bar, so we ordered a pour of that because it was a reasonable price. This was 2 years ago, back when it was still Stag Junior instead of just Stag.
Yep. Not to be confused with George T. Stag.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so confusing.
Yes.
So we had a pour of that, and we're like, okay, that was fine. To be fair, it was the heel of the bottle. Like we finished the bottle, so we got like the last 2 ounces in the bottle. So maybe it wasn't. Yeah, maybe it wasn't at its best. But then we ordered a Highland Park 12 immediately after that, which was also one of his favorite whiskeys. One of the ones that got him into whiskey. And it was my first time ever having a Highland Park. Not my first time ever having a peated Scotch or lightly peated Scotch. But my assessment of that was that it was clearly in a slightly higher tier of whiskey according to my palate. I believe the difference in my ratings between them was something like 81 versus 84 or something like that. So Highland Park 12 got the higher rating from me, and Reddit was not happy about that.
You know, a lot of those. Are we allowed to say tater on stream?
Sure.
Yeah, you know, a lot of those
Potato.
potatoes, right? No, so bourbon is a more narrow field to play in, and for me, it's not quite as interesting, right? My favorite type of whiskey is malt, right? So single malt does malt pretty darn well. And I just think there's a lot more kind of depth and variety and subtlety that you can find in them versus a bourbon. Although I do really like some finished bourbons; those are some pretty cool things.
Finished bourbon actually can be really good. I think that's, for me personally, oh, there it is. Oh, man, you're going to make me want to go
Found
find
it.
my box.
So I knew that it was 17 years old because at some point Highland Park saw that it wasn't selling, and they had little stickers made, which, if you
Yep.
look closely, if I can figure out how to make it work on my camera, has
Yep.
a very nice, like, Tolex texture background, like like it's off of an amplifier. I mean, the whole box is meant to look like an amplifier, but
Yep. I have the same one there.
I'm just gonna cry into my cast strength. Sorry, I don't have it.
I
I
would
think your
love
cast
to
strength is
try.
probably better.
The
Yeah,
problem is
probably.
I'll drink it. So like,
So you said yours has a sticker on it that says 17 years old.
Yep.
Yeah, mine it's subtle, but it's not hidden, right? On the front there.
Right.
I'll make it bigger so that you can see. So on the front there, it does say distilled 1999, bottled 2017, which to some people would say, oh, that's 18 years old, but you kind of round down because you don't know what the month is. So 17 years old. And I think in actual fact, it does probably say somewhere on the bottle the month or specifically 17 years old, but I'm not going to be able to find it right now. Oh yeah, it has the
sometimes
months. It has the months. On the side, it says
30th March,
filling.
29th April.
Yeah, so the latest
26th
fill
to
date
31st of
was
August.
right. The latest fill
Doesn't
date
say.
was the 31st of August. The latest was September 1999, and bottled. Doesn't actually say. So that's not helpful. All right. Anyway, sorry.
sometimes on the inside of the box they'll have a little leaflet that gives you a little bit more information.
Sorry, we have a comment from Rich the Pawn saying pot still, but I don't know what that is referring to.
Preferred
If you
types
could
of whiskey,
clarify,
I think.
Rich.
Because we were talking about our preferred types of whiskey, and David was
Oh,
saying,
the Irish single pot still. Yes.
yes,
Gotcha. Sorry, I was busy looking at a box.
the Valfather, I will say, is an absolutely fantastic dram. It's a little bit more heavily peated than Highland Park typically does.
That's what makes it
and
extra good.
It's got that beautiful, like. So I liken it to sitting around a campfire, eating like jam on heavily toasted wheat bread. That's just what it tastes like to me, and I love it. It is my favorite Highland Park, and that is
Same.
including the full volume, which is also a very good Highland Park.
Yeah, I haven't had 18 in a while, but I have a feeling Valfather and 18 are like. I think I might have to go buy a Highland Park 18 now.
Yeah.
I
know,
don't
every once in a
want to
while-
for the price.
No.
Every once in a while, I pour myself something on stream that I realize is distracting me because I'm so interested in it. I haven't had this in a long time. So, and I haven't reviewed it yet. So my brain is still going like, ooh, what's that? So I apologize for being distracted. I haven't seen really any questions come in on chat. So if anyone does have questions, I think we're probably going to start wrapping up soon. So let us know if you have any questions for David. In the meantime, maybe we can talk about a few of those other bottles that are veteran owned in your collection, Phil.
So I have, of course, Ironclad, um, Falls Church. Scott Harris was Navy, so Catoctin Creek, because they did just buy back Catoctin Creek, which is cool. They are back to being locally and family owned, which is extremely cool. Um, Brady's Distillery, um, Three Brothers Distilling, in, I believe, Disputanta, Virginia. I think that's where they are. Is veteran owned. Three Crosses is veteran owned, and Three Crosses makes this absolutely fantastic. Uh, Hold on, there we go.
Yep.
It is sort of like the Basil Hayden dark rye, except instead of being blended with port, it's finished in port barrels, which automatically makes it better in my opinion, because Basil Hayden's dark rye, technically speaking, it shouldn't be considered whiskey because it is whiskey blended with fortified wine. Which I've asked this of other people who haven't had an answer, but would that just make it extra heavily fortified wine?
Perhaps. I see where you're going with that.
My first instinct is yes. Additionally, maybe flavored whiskey, it would fall under that category, because you
I
can
hadn't thought
put,
about that.
yeah, because it's I don't know the ABV off the top of my head, but if it's over 30, then I'm assuming it falls under the flavored whiskey category.
Yeah. So the
And
other
I believe
thing
it is
that
over
is wild about the Noble Hound Dark Rice, look at that color.
Ooh.
That is almost wine dark. Like, that is amazingly rich red. And it's got that really strong sort of overripe grape, that like slightly bitter grape skin. Um, and and it's got a note that I've never been able to identify. It's like sort of citrusy, but not really. This is also 50% alcohol by volume. Produced by veteran-owned distillery in Powhatan, Virginia. It is the first distillery in Powhatan, Virginia since Prohibition.
Could that
Or since
citrus note
before
be a
Prohibition.
citrus that you haven't tried before, perhaps? Like one of those things like pomelo or kumquat or...
Yeah, it could be.
Is it like a kind of on the bitter side of citrus?
Yeah.
I'm just going to imagine in my head that that's pomelo, and I really love that note in a whiskey. So I'm just talking myself into it, like trying to convince myself maybe a little bit.
Well, it sounds like you need to get a bottle.
I think I need to get a bottle.
They also have a maple whiskey that is not maple infused, but aged in a charred sugar maple barrel.
Oh.
That is not yet on VA ABC store shelves. It is distillery only at this point in time because VA ABC isn't accepting any new products right now. But it is fantastic. And I had to basically do a coin flip to decide whether I was buying this or the maple whiskey.
So with the maple whiskey, does it come through as sweet, or do you get the maple without the sweetness?
there is some of the sweetness. It is not as sweet as the syrup infused whiskey, but it does have that sweetness and that distinctive maple note that nobody knows what creates it, which is one of my favorite fun facts about modern science is we don't know actually why maple syrup tastes the way it tastes.
Interesting. Pretty much the only thing I know about maple syrup is that tree sap, and then you boil it down like a ridiculous amount.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
That's the extent of my knowledge on maple syrup, and the fact that anybody figured out that was a good idea to do, let alone that it's essentially a booming industry now. I mean,
Oh yeah.
maybe that's overstating it, but right? Who doesn't love maple syrup?
So good.
I'm sure there are people, but
I will say I don't think the Mando in the lodge likes maple syrup. I think he said that he'd be watching, so he can yell at me in the lodge when we're done.
Isn't he Canadian?
He is.
Yes.
Oh, there you go. I guess if anybody has a right not to like maple syrup, a Canadian would qualify.
I am joking. I think he has repeatedly said that Canadian maple syrup is far superior to American maple syrup.
Yep. If memory serves, the Gretzky maple cask is their absolute favorite whiskey.
It was either that or the Gretzky ice wine, but I can't remember
Mm.
because he's talked about both.
Ice wine is really good.
It is. It's also really expensive because of the method of manufacture.
All right. Essentially exhausted of topics. There was one other thing that I wanted to maybe pull out. This has about a 50-50 chance. This mystery number 2 sample that Phil sent me has about a 50-50 chance of being a veteran-owned distillery. Should I taste it?
I think so.
All right.
Go for it.
Let's see if I can do tasting notes live. This might be terrible content.
Oh, won't know until you try.
Yeah. So I've been nosing it a little bit here. There's something about it that like on the nose rings as like not an artificial sweetener, but you know how they have like those sort of like sugar syrup type, but not like simple syrup, but like something like agave nectar or some other type of liquid sweetener alternative to sugar. Something like that is going on in the nose here. There's a little bit of like a sugar-free bubblegum kind of smell to the nose as well. Do you happen to know which one sample number 2 is, and that you're drinking the same thing right now for my benefit?
I know what the 2 mystery samples were.
Okay.
I don't want to reach for either of them currently.
Gotcha. I could,
but
or you could turn off your camera, or I could close my eyes.
Oh yeah. I will say now that I know for sure, or I'm pretty sure I know which one you got, and unfortunately, it isn't the veteran-owned one, but that makes it even funnier for who got the other one.
Okay. I want to dig in on that statement in a minute. Okay, I don't know, there's something I want to say there's like cinnamon bark, like not like the cinnamon powder, but like you'd put a cinnamon stick in something. I want to say that's going on in the nose. Honestly, like it kind of smells like fondant to me. I think overall that's the profile that I'm getting from the nose. Let's have a taste.
Yeah.
Huh. That is surprisingly dry. Like that tastes like bark a little bit. Like it's a little ashy, I want to say, but not in a peaty way. It almost oh, you know what it tastes like? It tastes like a grilled hot dog bun.
I mean, that's good in its own right.
Yeah, no, I'm not upset about it. It just is surprising because it doesn't match the nose in the slightest.
Yeah, you were definitely leading towards sweet with the smell.
Yeah, totally. It is anything but sweet. It's It's a little bit spicy. It's a good. I don't know what the proof is on this at all, but I would guess 45-ish%. I guess we'll find out. It's like it's not very hot. It's not very viscous. But it's not thin either. Yeah, on the finish, like that hot dog thing is still coming. It's like like it's a little bit like that sort of hot dog water residue on your bun, right? Like that sort of the last bite of the hot dog that doesn't have any hot dog in it. You know what I mean? Like that's honestly what I'm getting on this profile, and like I don't dislike it. It's just amusing. I've never had a whiskey that tastes like this before.
I don't think I've had a whiskey that tastes like what you're describing either.
All right, should I open this up or just let you reveal it for me?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. And by the way, Phil does this wonderful thing where he's got a wax insignia that he uses to seal bottles.
And
Let's see, is this going to show up on camera? He seals the tops of the sample bottles with a little duck stamp, and he uses a blend of gold and black wax.
Get the little duck here.
Yeah, there you go. Drum roll, please. Can't hear. If either of you are doing it, I can't hear it at all. Thank you, StreamYard, for filtering
right.
Yeah.
Good background.
Okay. Mystery sample number 2, Merlarky Smokehouse Whiskey, naturally cured and finished in wine casks. 45%. Nailed it.
Yes.
And Phil says, sorry. And and now that I know what this is, I'm amazed that I essentially got the flavor profile. That flavor profile totally makes sense with what this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was one of the ones I had asked you. I wanted to know what this tasted like, and I totally forgot. Between the time we initially talked about this and when I actually got the samples from you, I had forgotten that it existed, that it was on the list. So that's a fun surprise. Thanks, Phil.
So I will say right now, the very sweet fondant note on the nose, I thought it was the other one because it is also very like sort of not quite artificial sweet on the nose. But Merlarky Smokehouse is, I think, one of the weakest products that they produce. I really like actually their heritage whiskey. And I've gotta say, I was surprised and disappointed by Smokehouse. I was kind of hoping that you got the other one and that
this is not the veteran-owned one.
Well, okay, so for the purposes of today's video, I was hoping that you got this one because I believe Merlarky is founded by veterans. And by I believe, I mean there was an article a couple of years ago where he talked about how that one of the founders talked about how his service impacted his approach to business. But I was kind of expecting for you to get the other one and expecting for, or not, I was hoping that it'd turn out this way, but would have been amused if it turned out the other way because Ian has fond memories of Smokehouse and is always amazed when I talk about how much I dislike it.
Well, all right, let me throw a rating out. I based on the nose, like that sort of there's a somewhat artificial. I personally hate cake fondant. I think that's a travesty, and that you should always be using buttercream instead.
Absolutely.
So the fact that there's
look as pretty.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. We for our wedding we went with a naked like a naked frosting strawberry shortcake. And we thought that looked great personally. We were not a fan of any of the cake makers that put fondant on their cakes because they were more concerned with appearance than taste, and they mostly tasted like garbage, especially the fondant. You like, even if you ignore the fondant though. But anyway, so since
does taste like ass.
It does. It tastes well. It tastes like bad bubble gum. It tastes like bad artificial bubble gum, right? Like that's what the fondant flavor is. It's barely edible, right? It is absolutely made of some kind of gum and sugar,
Yeah. It's
and
like
it's
xanthan gum
technically
and sugar.
xanthan gum, I believe. Yeah, it's technically edible, and that's all you can say about it in its favor.
technically
It's technically edible.
it
I don't know
it
that I'd
does keep
want to eat it.
it does keep the
But
moisture of your cake in. So if your cake was made several days in advance for your wedding, it will be more moist if you have fondant on it.
True. Ours was
I
ours was actually fresh made. We went with a baker who did not have a wedding cake business. And this was a local baker, and they charged us what they would charge for just a regular cake of this style. And they brought it to our wedding and worked with the florist to add the fresh flowers to the cake on site.
Ooh,
And it cost us nothing but the cost of the cake and a delivery fee, which was great. I
nice.
think it was like a total of $400 out the door. Which is like fantastic for a wedding cake. If you don't know, you could
Yes.
easily spend upwards of $1,000 plus on a wedding cake,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're
Yeah.
putting fresh flowers on it.
And multi tiers and layers and flavors and all the complicated stuff that weddings tend to come with.
Yep.
I have to say, as much as I love the phrase technically legal, I hate the phrase technically edible.
Yeah, so if I was putting a rating on this whiskey, it gets points for being interesting for sure. And like I don't dislike it, but I think I would get tired of this and after of just a few tries of it, and I would probably fall back on this smells a bit like fondant, and it tastes a bit like hot dog bun and hot dog water, which is essentially what I was describing, but like in probably less negative terms. And actually, like on the palate and finish, like I don't hate that, but I think it doesn't have enough going for it to be really good. And the fondant is a definite flaw. So this would get below average for me. On my 10-point scale, I'd give this a 4 plus probably, which essentially means that it has a flaw or two, and it's otherwise not that interesting. Very cool. Yeah,
Right.
I'm glad that I did for the purposes of this podcast. I'm glad that this one actually was the veteran owned or the veteran founded
Yeah.
brand.
And again, the little sorry on the end is because I personally don't enjoy it terribly much. They
Yeah.
they do make very good stuff. I've had a number of their other products, and I'm not a huge fan of their flavored whiskeys, but they're they're filling a niche in the market with that, and it makes them money. I understand it. Smokehouse sort of is a weird, out of nowhere, like it doesn't, it doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't do anything for me. I don't particularly enjoy it. And now that you've connected the hot dog note with Smokehouse, yeah, yeah. It doesn't help that I had hot dogs for dinner, just like Genji.
Well, I suppose I also have to say sorry, and for anyone else who's trying this. Although I believe at some point I did look up a review of this whiskey, and hot dog water was one of the descriptors that they had given. So people who say that tasting like tasting whiskey, like tasting notes are a fake thing, right? Like I've just blind tasted a sample and came up with the same descriptor that somebody else came up with, and everybody else essentially agrees with me. So, you're gonna have a hard time convincing me that tasting notes aren't real, but that's I'm biased, so whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's your brain trying to make connections, and that's the connection it makes. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't.
I'm gonna be chuckling about this for the rest of the night.
I'm gonna look for hot dog water as a note in future whiskeys now.
Sometimes you get sulfury whiskeys, and I think that if it doesn't come across as cabbage or daikon or straight up farts or sewage, there's a particular sample, infamous bottle of Bruichladdich that was finished in a, if I'm not mistaken, a Madeira cask or possibly just a sherry cask.
If it is what I'm recalling reading about, I believe it was a Madeira cask.
It has, yeah, that sounds more right to me. It has been referred to. So I got a sample from a friend, and they labeled it only with with one of those Avery dots that has a poop emoji printed on it. And of course I knew what it was because we talked about it before, and let me say that the best possible descriptor of that would be Cheerios. For some reason, the sort of sulfury note of that raw grain in Cheerios smells about the same as like I don't want to get into this live, but
Yeah.
like basically there's like on the good side of sewage apparently is Cheerios. That's a thing in my head for some reason. There's like a spectrum from Cheerios to sewage, and that whiskey is somewhere along that line.
Okay, hopefully
I
closer to the Cheerios
Oh,
side than the
for me,
sewage.
closer to the Cheerios, but I still wouldn't say that I would prefer to drink that whiskey. Right? It's definitely like bring it out to troll your friends and just like open up the lid and let them smell it and let them go like, oh, what's that?
I will
It's delicious,
say,
I swear.
a hint for Ian about what's in his. I've gotten petroleum notes on a lot of whiskeys.
Mm.
The other mystery sample that I've given out recently, not counting the one that I gave to one of my coworkers, has the strongest petroleum note I have ever encountered in a whiskey. And it's actually like genuinely off-putting as someone who has had the experiences around just large amounts of petroleum products, leaded and unleaded gasoline.
Gotcha. I normally get like diesel or sort of petroleum or machine oil type notes from Dundered rum, and I don't think ever a whiskey.
So it is purely a me thing. I don't think anybody else has this experience.
And
Yeah,
that, just to
I
be
love-
clear, that's
I love
not the
those
mystery
notes.
sample,
This
right?
is not the mystery
Okay,
sample.
okay.
This has a note of home heating oil, like #2 home heating oil.
Ah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, Phil is showing, for people who are only listening, Phil is showing
Oh yeah.
Old Granddad 114.
Yes. Which
I
has,
love when that comes up in the lodge. It's just such a specific thing.
You almost know Phil by that note with the number of times this comes up.
well, because anytime someone brings up like a weird tasting note, or we're talking about weird tasting notes, or in one of the conversations that we had, it was what was the weirdest tasting note you've enjoyed? This specifically, the enjoyed, and I genuinely love this whiskey, and the #2 home heating oil note. Notably, not the taste of it, because #2 home heating oil is by and large tasteless, flavorless, but it does have a specific odor.
How do
And
you
this
know that?
tastes,
I think you had to go back and compare.
bleeding a
Take a little sip of home heating oil.
furnace.
Yep, tastes like Old Granddad.
Yeah. Bleeding home furnace fuel system. It is by and large tasteless, but has an odor, and there is a strong note towards the tail end of Old Granddad 114 that reminds me of that odor, and it reminds me of winters as a child, and we're not necessarily a child, but like, you know what I mean.
Oh yeah.
Old enough to help dad, but young enough to not be an adult and to have fond memories of it.
Indeed.
Specifically the age of 12. No older, no younger.
I mean, I think I started helping when I was 10 or 11. But yeah, we used to have the standard, oil-fired home furnace. In the winters, nothing beats it for generating heat, but it has some downsides. One of which being the massive amounts of hydrocarbons that it produces.
As long as it goes outside and isn't leaking inside, you're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Polar bears can fend for themselves. They'll be fine.
Yep.
And the ozone layer.
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming up. We're knocking on the door of 6 p.m. here. I think we have time for probably one more question for David. And seeing none in the chat, I would ask David, on the topic we've been talking about, what has your strangest tasting experience been?
Ooh, my strangest tasting experience. Oh, that's a good question. I was thinking of one of my wife's notes recently, so I'll bring that up and dodge the question like a politician. Um,
Perfect for government work.
oh, exactly, right? I did mention I work for the government. There was a particular sample of a Trails End bourbon, which is, for those unfamiliar, it is a Clear Creek distillery finished bourbon. So they get a Kentucky bourbon and then they bring it out to Oregon and then they finish it in a variety of different things. One of a private sale went through and they actually finished it in McCarthy barrels. Do you have the Trails End that was finished in McCarthy barrels? It was sold to a bar up in your area.
I do not, and now I'm very intrigued. I'm going to ask Joe or Caitlin if they know where I might source that. But this one is
probably all gone.
Fair.
But
this one.
Go ahead.
Sorry, this one is the Trails End 10, the standard Trails End 10, which is finished in Garyana oak after it had been a 10-year-old bourbon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is a version of, I think it's the 8-year, that was finished in McCarthy barrels, and it has the smokiness to it from the McCarthy, from the peat. It's a fantastic thing. My wife was like, "This reminds me of being at the carnival, eating cotton candy, standing next to like a deep fry station where they put ungodly things in the deep fryer." So it's that scent and smell of
interesting
cooking oil mixed with the sweetness of the cotton candy at the state fair.
Right.
And I'm like,
bring
man,
it, we deep fry it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Some of that's coming from the bourbon. I bet that funnel cake kind of flavor is coming from McCarthy's, because I've heard things like jelly donut used to describe McCarthy's releases. But this one, yeah, for sure. I think the cotton candy is coming from the bourbon and the combination of the bourbon and the Garyana oak.
Yeah, and Garyana does different things that I quite enjoy. I would be remiss if I didn't give out a shout out to Brass and Anchor. It's another veteran-owned, Navy veteran, specifically owned whiskey. It's a Kentucky straight or a straight bourbon. Sorry, not Kentucky. It's a straight bourbon whiskey.
I believe that they also are part of a larger group, or they're an element of a larger group that do a lot for veteran charities and supporting VA relief efforts and such.
Yep.
And to quote the Gaming Genji, quoting Ralph Wiggum, "Ew, this tastes like grandma." I can't do Ralph Wiggum's voice right now.
Yeah. Let me put that up on screen. Yeah.
I didn't know you could do that. That's really cool.
Yeah, we didn't figure out. Oh, yeah. So for anybody who hasn't been a regular watcher, we used to do streams from OBS. And after I appeared on Embellish Podcast, I discovered this platform called StreamYard. There will be an affiliate link in the description if you wanted to buy a subscription to StreamYard, if you yourself was looking at doing some podcasting or streaming that might benefit from having all of the production done for you. But I'm going to keep that ad read short. That's the only form of affiliate link that we have so far, by the way.
Clearly, we need to reach out to some of these distilleries mentioned in today's podcast.
Yeah, absolutely, we should. I actually have asked about affiliate links from some distilleries, but most of them don't sell directly from their own websites, so that's kind of a non-starter.
Yeah.
Because everybody's fine with affiliate links, right? It's different to say we're going to sponsor your podcast and pay you money directly, but like if you drive sales, yeah, sure, you can have a cut. Right, that's more of the affiliate link model. But again, we do this for fun, and it's a hobby, and we call out the brands that we like because we like them, and that's about all there is to that. But anyway, back when we were streaming from OBS on Twitch exclusively, Phil was the more regular of our co-hosts, but due to work scheduling, Phil has not been able to appear very recently. But Phil actually helped me do the technical demo figuring out the sound check and all the things that we needed to do with this platform. And back then, there were some things that we did not figure out. And one of those things was that we can show comments from the chat. Obviously, we weren't using Twitch or YouTube chat at that moment, so there was nothing to show. But that was a cool thing that we figured out at some point that you can do here. And the other thing is that I had done a custom overlay for the Vodka with Caitlin Bartley episode, but StreamYard actually has banners built in that show in the same way as the comments. So we can have this, a topic slide out on the bottom like that, veteran-owned brands. And other sorts of fun stuff like that. And also we get to show, we've got multiple logos that we can show. We've got the DemiTastes podcast logo, and we've got the Whiskey Lodge segment logo. Courtesy of Phil, actually, for anybody who didn't know, that Whiskey Lodge logo was actually created by Phil. Thank you very much for that.
Yep.
And the DemiTastes logo was created by another member of the Whiskey Lodge who has not appeared on stream.
And I think it's fair to credit them, Mike Kobayashi in the lodge. Fantastic artist, sort of in general, and also did fantastic work on that.
Yeah, and by the way, this she considered to be a rough draft.
It looks pretty darn good.
Yeah, it was. I did a very rough sketch, and that sketch got turned into a vector, and that vector became this little challenge coin. I call it the task cairn for the DemiTastes blended with the Glen cairn. And the only modification I think that I heard that they wanted to do was to mirror this and make the handle and make some part of the design look like a DT for DemiTastes. I think you could probably say, like, even from this angle, that sort of handle on the cup looks like a D turned backwards, and the intersection with the rim of the cup kind of looks like a T. But, it's a little bit of a stretch, I guess. Hopefully this is distinctive enough that it doesn't need to have any letters on it, because that is good logo design.
Yeah.
But anyway, enough of self-promotion. Or actually, let's finish with self-promotion. It's time for us to wrap up this podcast. For all of you who've watched this far on Veterans Day, a holiday for most people, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and also join the Whiskey Lodge. You're going to find links to those in the various places in Twitch, YouTube, anywhere that has a link tree. So my Instagram, right? You can find a link to the Whiskey Lodge invite. You can, of course, find a link to the Twitch channel if you prefer to watch on Twitch, or if you're watching on Twitch and you prefer to subscribe on YouTube, vice versa. Thanks to StreamYard, we are simultaneously streaming to both platforms, which is very cool. And now I think with no further ado, we are past 6 p.m. and I should go out and be a good host to the friend who's actually hanging out in our house right now, and thank her for her patience with another cocktail. Gentlemen, it's been fun, as always, hanging out with you guys. And this is the first lengthy verbal that I've actually gotten to have FaceTime with David. So this has been a lot of fun. Until next time, we'll see you in the lodge.
See ya.
Cheers.
Slancha.